Welcome, sustainable mobility world leaders and those of us who are hoping to be in the future. This is Transforming Transportation 2021, a virtual edition. The title of this conference is always meaningful. It says what we want to do on the tin, and particularly this year when we are in the middle of a global pandemic. So, over the next 3 days, we will be discussing where are we now? Where do we want to get to when it comes to transforming transportation in the future? Where you are right now, well, you're with me. I'm Femi OK. I'm your plenary host for the next 3 days. And this is the main stage. If you're on the Hop-In platform, there are lots of interesting, exciting places for you to virtually go and explore. You'll have time to do that during the break. If you're on World Bank Live, welcome. It is great to see you. And the way that we can all communicate and chat back and forth with each other on this Hop-In platform, where there's a little chat box under the main plenary, the main stage. You can put your questions, your thoughts, your comments for every single speaker, every single session right in there. I will see it and bring you into the conference. So we're in the conference together. Use that chat space. If you're on World Bank Live, TTDC21 is the hashtag. In fact, it's a hashtag for all of us, where we can put our comments, our thoughts onto Twitter. So now we should get started. There's a lot to do. I'm going to hand over to the president of the World Bank Group, David Malpass.
Thanks very much, Femi, and thanks, Makhtar, for putting together what looks like a great conference. I'm glad to be able to open it, and then I'm going to look forward to the readout of all of the activities. As all of you know that are on the conference, the transportation sector is critical in achieving sustainable development. Transport takes workers to their jobs, children to school, goods to local and global markets. The pandemic has shown the importance of global supply chains and the logistics systems. We're working every day with that on the vaccine challenges so that we can reach vulnerable populations. So all of this is very important and critical to how people connect within society and within the world. The gaps, though, are huge. They include sustainability and also affordability. We estimate that it's $420 billion per year that's needed for roads, ports, airports, and rail. 840 million people still live more than 2 kilometers away from a usable road in low-income countries. Half of them are in Africa. One of my first trips with the World Bank was to Madagascar. In fact, I guess my first official trip, and you could see that there. A huge percentage of the population living far from a usable road, and that makes it hard to get goods to market, children to school, and all of the things that are needed for transport. The costs have also been an obstacle to growth and competitiveness. In Africa, for example, transport costs comprise up to 40% of the final price of goods. In Cote d'Ivoire, 57% of businesses say transport is a major obstacle to their operations. So improving transport connectivity is going to be key for achieving both social objectives, economic objectives, and climate objectives. Global transport emissions have grown faster than those of almost any other area over the last 50 years. The transport sector now accounts for a quarter, 25% of global energy-related emissions, and this we think could reach 33% if we stay on this course. So we're going from a quarter to a third of all global emissions coming from the transport sector. Used cars, for example, exported from developed to developing countries tend to be more polluting and less safe. But in Africa, only 9 out of 54 countries follow international good practices in order to regulate the imports of used vehicles. In many cities, unsafe and poorly designed public transport make it harder for women and the disabled to use transportation systems. So The World Bank works actively on trying to make transport safer as part of the connectivity challenge and getting people to jobs, women to jobs, children safely to school. Poor quality rural roads keep farmers from reaching markets and people from accessing jobs and social services. So it's important to increase the sector's resilience as we look. We're looking for ways to have a green, inclusive, resilient recovery from COVID and growth into the future. And in order to do that, we've got to have less polluting, more effective, and universal public transport. It's got to provide infrastructure. We need the infrastructure that would allow more access to options, such as walking, bicycling, improving the urban and land management. All of these are critical steps in finding, as countries look for ways to improve their own transportation systems and connect with themselves and rest of the world. The World Bank's first priority is supporting countries' efforts to build more sustainable transport systems that contribute to their social and economic development goals. To that end, we're helping countries introduce quality mass transit and helping them transition away from high polluting and fragmented informal urban transport services. These are some of the big polluters and climate change contributors. We're also helping countries implement policies to disincentivize inefficient traveling and move people away from cars to buses, trains, bicycles, and other sustainable modes. And we're promoting lower emission freight, such as inland waterways, railways, and short sea shipping, and using information technology to improve the efficiency of the trucking industry. So I'll give you a few examples of our work, and then I'm going to sit down and look forward to a very good conference. We're working with 40 cities, including Dakar, Quito, and Jinju, to scale up policies that bring together transport, land use planning, technology, and private finance to promote urban environmental sustainability. In Karnataka, India, a World Bank project has served a population of about 35 million people, including 300,000 farmers and 1,600 industries, with the development of 1,000 kilometers of high-quality highways that we hope will create direct employment of 70 million labor days. And in Egypt, a vehicle scrapping and recycling program helped to replace the aging taxis in Cairo, some of which were over 50 years old. I wrote on those in the 1980s with 46,000 newer taxis. The project reduced accidents, pollution, and the equivalent of over 340,000 tons of carbon dioxide. IFC, our private sector arm, is also working to promote more sustainable transport solutions. For example, in Ghana, IFC financed a new deepwater port at Tema, which will handle more than 90% of the country's container traffic. The expected trade boost could generate as many as 450,000 new jobs. And in Bogota, IFC supported the Transmi cable. It's a cable car line which reduced commute times for the poorest residents from 2 hours to 13 minutes, and that increased access to jobs. So it's very inclusive as people are able to have transportation. At the World Bank Group, we have goals for investment in climate action, and we're seeking to make investments in infrastructure and transportation that can contribute to these goals. We also want to provide the critical access to infrastructure and transportation that's required to meet the twin goals of reducing poverty and boosting shared prosperity. Forums like this one, Transforming Transportation, are useful. They're critical, I think, to bring partners from around the world to discuss these issues. The World Bank can help convene this kind of meetings that's so critical for the formation of new knowledge, new conversation, new ways to think about these challenges. So in the coming days, I urge you to consider pragmatic, practical, and impactful solutions to the challenges in the transportation sector. With that, thank you, and back to FEMA.
Thank you very much, President David Malpass. We are now officially open, Transforming Transportation 2021, or hashtag TTDC21 if you're talking about us on Twitter. You are talking to each other and doing your warm welcomes, which is very much part of TT. Let me tell you where the hellos are coming from. Hello, Sao Paulo, Bucharest, Buenos Aires, Accra, Kampala, Geneva, Newcastle. Hello, Newcastle, Netherlands, Belgium, Holland, Mozambique, and the list goes on. Everybody around the world, you are very welcome to what is now a global TT21. I have to do some thank yous, just a couple, because we wouldn't be here without them. So I'm going to say thank you to the sponsor of TT, which is the PTV Group, and the media partner, which is Devex. Devex, thank you. Otherwise, you would not be seeing me, you would not be hearing me. Now, we are going to start the first of two plenary sessions today. Let's roll the tape for session number 1. The imminent crisis up ahead. That is our session. You will meet the session panelists in just a moment. But we are going to kick off with Andrew Steer, who's the president and CEO of the WRI. Andrew, there'll be some people who would say that you and imminent crisis go together beautifully, but I would fight those people. Andrew Steer, welcome to Transforming Transportation 2021. Where should we start?
Well, thank you, Femi. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a great honor for the World Resources Institute to jointly manage this conference. We've been doing it for several years now. It's become the biggest and I think most important in the world. And as President Malpass just said, it's practical, it's pragmatic. We look for solutions. So distinguished ministers, distinguished mayors, leaders of the transportation revolution in the world. Let's get going. I'm going to be brief and I'll talk quickly simply because we're really looking forward to the panel that is coming. So we have to build back better, and we need to remember where we've come from over the last. I'm trying to turn forward my slides. Oh, there we are. How we've come over the last year. It's been a dreadful year, hasn't it? The numbers are simply horrifying. And it's cost a huge amount, an estimate of 25 trillion by 2025. But worse than that, the World Bank estimates over 100 million people may have been pushed back into poverty. And we've learned a lot about injustice in the world. As we move forward, we've got to take these issues extremely seriously. This last year was the hottest year in recorded history, equal with 2016. And in addition to that, we had effects of climate change, which were stunning. The worst fires recorded in a number of geographies around the world, more storms in the Atlantic region hit land than ever before in recorded history. We had the worst locust infestation in the Horn of Africa for 70 years, all linked, as scientists tell us, to climate change. As President Malpass just said so well, transportation has a major role to play as we try to build back better. He just gave us these data just here, and we know what we need to do. This is the business as usual path, and we now need to get to a 1.5 degree scenario. We can't do that by incremental change. We need radical change. So I'd like just to sort of lay out the upheaval going on in the transport sector very, very briefly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you live in Nepal, there's been some good times. You've seen Everest for the first time in many, many years. Biking has become and walking has become much, much more popular. And the leading mayors, some of which we have on the panel today, and some of the ministers have done some incredibly innovative things on the new mobility. But look, the bad. Public transportation is in a massive crisis, as you know. Ridership has shrunk massively. And of course, that's put sort of incredible economic pressure on transport systems around the world. Here are some numbers for the EU, Brazil, India, but tens of thousands of transport companies around the world, big and small, are now on the verge of bankruptcy, and some have already gone over. So this is a huge threat, not to only the vibrancy of cities, but to the poor in the world. In Africa alone, 80 million people is estimated to have fallen into poverty. The collapse of public transportation is just one of the reasons, but it's a very important reason for the reasons that David Malpass just said. And the ugly, surveys around the world are now showing that people want to get back in their cars. They don't trust public transportation. So we've got a pretty serious problem. We need to go straight at the bullseye. So as we think now about building back better, green transport is absolutely essential. And I know many of you are at the very center of that discussion. Some good news here. If you are a government and you want to reboot your economy and you want to create jobs quickly, there is no better option than to use new green transportation, including cycling and walking, if you want to create jobs quickly. And that's very good news. Now, the question is, are countries doing it? This is an assessment of the $13 trillion that so far has been allocated as part of the rebooting of the world economy. And of that amount, about 30% of it, one can code it for either being green or gray. And you'll notice that some countries, led by the EU, have been quite innovative, the way they're thinking. The one on the far right is what Mr. Biden has been offering. We don't know whether he'll get it through Congress, but you'll notice that most countries have been going back to rather the old-fashioned sort of way. And if you look at transportation in particular, if you try to estimate sort of how much is green, how much is gray, unfortunately, most of it is still the old-fashioned. So in other words, let's pour cement on roads. Let's create ring roads and flyovers. But actually, if you invest in public transportation and new forms of transportation, you will get a lot more jobs and you'll get them a lot more quickly. So what we need to do, obviously, is think about sort of four things. We've got to recover the economy. Number one, we've got to think of health and safety. We've got to address climate, and it has to be inclusive, because quite frankly, we've failed on that in the past and we have shocking inequalities in the world. So what does that imply? Well, it implies a three-pronged approach for transportation: quality mass transit, shifting travel to energy-efficient modes, and electrify transportation. And listening today and on the panel, we have leaders around the world in this case. And just to sort of remind you of the facts, if you've got $1 million, you can create 8 jobs if you build roads. If you invest in charging stations, you get 15 to 21 jobs. EV manufacturing, 16 to 22 jobs. And so you can see that actually this is a pretty good deal, expanding public transportation, 23 to 29 jobs. So for heaven's sake, why don't we do it? Here are just 5 opportunities just to frame the issue that we might find useful in the discussion that comes. First of all, we've got to restore public transportation, which is in crisis. First, we need to stabilize it. Then we need to reimagine it. And we've seen some great examples around the world of governments and mayors that are really committing. Here's just one from Nigeria, but there are many. And we now need to replicate that and scale it up. Second, we need to double down on active transportation. It's very, very exciting to see what's happening. In Colombia, for example, the mayor, Claudia Lopez, he wants half of all trips to be made by bike. Very, very exciting, and we need to now make this a revolution. Third, we need to electrify transportation. It turns out that actually investing in electric buses can be cheaper over time when you take maintenance costs into account, and it needs to be done right away. By the way, we're the World Resource Institute, thanks to the Bezos Earth Fund, we've been asked to help really push through the nearly 500,000 school buses which exist in the United States, almost none of which are electric, and make them become electric. And by the way, one of the wonderful things is they provide a modern electricity storage system for the grid, and they save dozens of power plants from needing to be built. So it's a very, very exciting time for the electrification. Fourth, we need to shift people and goods to rail. The evidence is overwhelming. Many people in the audience have done world-class work on this. You know that. The question is, it's simply not happening fast enough. We need leadership that is much, much stronger. And finally, we need clean R&D for the harder to abate sectors. And what we're finding is that actually the hard to abate sectors are not quite as hard as we thought. Indeed, Mission Possible, the Commission for the Energy Transformation, has demonstrated that it's less than 1% of GDP by 2050 to get full decarbonization of the so-called hard to abate sectors, which we now need to call not quite so hard to abate. Let me end just by talking about the sort of the path to Glasgow, because as President Malpass said, transport has a central role to play in this decisive year in going into this decisive decade. First, net zero targets are taking off. So we've got a lot to be pleased about. We never would have dreamt 5 years ago at Paris that 64 countries today, accounting for more than half of all the global emissions, would actually be committed to net zero. Nor would we have dreamt that over 1,000 companies would have been committed to science-based targets, which means total decarbonization over the next 30 years. Adding all of their emissions, including scope 3, comes to over 7 gigatons. We never would have dreamt that 10,500 cities would have signed up to the Global Covenant of Mayors, which commits you to move towards net zero. So this is all extremely positive. The plain fact of the matter is, as of today, it's not yet fully adding up. The World Resources Institute just brought out a piece of work last month that shows this is what would be required in order to get to 1.5 degrees. As President Malpass said, the transport sector, there you see electrification of vehicles, needs to happen 22 times faster than it is now. But the good news is it's starting to accelerate pretty rapidly with General Motors' announcement last week. So what's needed now? Great that everybody's committing to net zero in the middle of the century, but what's needed are now the 10-year plans here to 2030, and those are called so-called NDCs as part of the Paris deal. So far, 71 have been updated, and 43 of them are more ambitious than last time, which is exactly what you're supposed to do under the Paris deal. Now, the next thing that's needed is finance. A wonderful picture of our favorite institution, the World Bank here. And what's needed? Well, the problem is there simply is not enough finance at the moment for green transportation or the green revolution. And you'll remember that 11 years ago in Copenhagen, the world agreed, rich countries agreed to put $100 billion per year by 2020. That hasn't happened yet. It needs to happen this year. So too, the financial sector as a whole needs to be aligned. Some very exciting work led by Governor Mark Carney as to how do we move the entire financial sector not only towards net zero, but actually driving forward the green revolution. And third, we've got to think about debt forgiveness, and obviously the World Bank is at the very center of that. I've just lost my clicker, by the way. Here we are. So that's finance, and that's a very, very high priority indeed. My clicker is not well. Oh, there we go. So finally, what's needed? The so-called race to zero. And this is one of the exciting things on the journey to Glasgow, is the notion that actually out there are sectors that need radical reform, and they can be reformed. We can have transformation of these sectors that actually will be good for the economy as well as good for people. So, for example, we already talked about the elimination of the internal combustion engine. We need, by the end of this year, 40 countries that are committed to totally phase out the internal combustion engine by 2035 for cars and light vehicles. It's perfectly doable. The economics make sense. And the United Kingdom, of course, has said that it will do it by 2030. So too, zero carbon shipping, which we thought was impossible. Actually, it's not. Companies like Maersk have already made that commitment. And so too, battery storage, whose costs have been coming down. We need to see a real revolution. And these require multi-stakeholder coalitions, private sector, governments, science coming together. And that's what we need to do on the so-called race to zero. Finally, I just want to sort of end with a point that we need to think about as transport experts. We need system change, not climate change. There are no silver bullets. This is a jigsaw puzzle, not a simple, easy solution. Therefore, we need to think differently. And whether it's the World Bank or whether the various ministries that are represented here, or whether the many cities, or whether the researchers, we need to work together to think through what could happen in this decisive decade if we work together. Finally, so what does this add up to? Well, these are very rough numbers, by the way, because there's a lot of uncertainty embedded in them. Under current policies, that's the NDCs that were committed in the time of Paris and over the last 5 years, we're heading for roughly a 3 degrees Celsius world. This is a disaster. Now, if you take all of the countries and all of the cities and all of the companies that have committed to net zero, we're heading towards a 2.1 degree Celsius world, which is real progress. The problem is most of those that have committed to net zero don't yet know how they'll get there. And of course, many haven't yet done it. So that would be a real improvement. If you think about it, going from 3 to 2.1 this year, this decisive year, could be a 1 degree world. So these are very exciting times. And what we now need to do is make sure that they are implemented. And let me just close on this. Oh, has it gone? I've lost my final slide. But what I wanted to say is, look, it's an incredible joy for us at the World Resources Institute to work with the World Bank, to work with all of you on this really remarkable agenda together. There has never been a time that is as exciting as this, that has as much opportunity as this in terms of jobs, in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of just making life better and healthier and more joyful. And all of you on this call today, are at the very center of this. And now let's turn this back to Femi and to the wonderful panel we're about to hear. Thank you, Femi.
Andrew Stier is President and CEO of WRI, co-host of Transforming Transportation with the World Bank. Andrew, you inspired some questions. Hold tight. This is a speed round because we want to get on with the rest of the session. But Jeff Olson says, hearing that walking and cycling as global priorities in both opening keynotes, so yours, Andrew, and also President David Malpass of the World Bank, gives us hope for the future. Thank you. Thoughts, Andrew? Instantly. Go ahead.
Yes. We've had several million years of so-called civilization, and the best we seem to have come up with is being stuck in your car for 2 hours getting to work. This is not civilization's greatest achievement. For 100 years, we've been designing cities around automobiles, and we ought to start designing them around people. And on the panel, we've got some leaders that believe exactly in this. My goodness me, we do not need to get into our automobiles. We can get into public transport and we can cycle. At the moment, things are simply not set up for that, but they are moving in that direction. And the example I gave from Bogota, really quite remarkable, but that's happening in more than 400 cities around the world.
Thanks, Andrew. You did an excellent job at the speed round. Thank you very much. Andrew Stier is the CEO and President of WRI, co-host of Transforming Transportation with the World Bank. Andrew, thank you very much. And hello, panel. I love this panel. Such a good panel. A-listers, all of them for Plenty One. How perfect. Let me say hello to Stientje, Makhtar, to Yvonne, and also to Kailash. And they are going to actually do their formal introductions to you and say who they are, why they are important in this conversation. So let me start with Makhtar. Makhtar, do your full introduction. Tell everybody who you are.
Hi, Femi. My name is Makhtar Diop. I'm Vice President for Infrastructure and Digital Development at the World Bank. And we've been organizing this event for many years, partnering with WRI. And I'm really thrilled today to be here and be part of the conversation and to see you again.
Nice to have you. Minister Veldhoven, nice to see you. Do your full introduction. Tell everybody why you're important in this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Minister for the Environment in the Netherlands and responsible for transport decarbonization, and also chair of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. And I think Andrew just outlined in his sheets exactly why this is such an urgent issue to tackle. And I'm very much looking forward to exchanging views with the other panelists.
Absolutely, I am too. Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, nice to see you in this conversation. Please introduce yourself to the people around the world who are watching Transforming Transportation right now. What do they need to know about you? Hello, Mayor, Madam Mayor. I'll come back to Madam Mayor. We have a little slight connection problem, which is okay. I am expecting this transforming transportation guests and audience around the world, because we are connecting all over. So that is a possibility. Stand by for that. But that is what I do. And that is why I'm here for you. Okay, Kailash Gahlot, nice to see you. Will you tell everybody who you are, why you're important to this conversation? Introduce yourself. Okay. Kailash, I believe you're muted. If you see that little panel at the bottom, and it's got a little... there we go. All right, take two. Hello,
Good evening.
Kailash.
Good evening. Namaskar. I am Kailash Gahlot. I am Minister for Transport, Delhi, capital of India, and one of the largest democracies in the world. And I think very challenging times we are having, and I think thank you WRI and World Bank. During this pandemic, we are here to discuss very important things, and I think very exciting things are happening in the transport sector. We are coming up with electric buses, electric charging infrastructure, making public transport more secure and safe so that people switch to public transport and reduce the pollution as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I am just thinking back, panelists, to a year ago to Transforming Transportation, actually a little over a year ago, in January. And we were all gathered at the World Bank and people were concerned about how we fly less and pollution. And just a year later, Makhtar, this is an extraordinary situation if you're working in sustainable transport and transforming transport. This is an amazing place to be. I'm hearing a lot of people saying, build back better, build back greener. I'm wondering how much fear that you pick up. You cannot show fear. You have to be fearless. But if you were candid about what this last, I'm just going to say 10 months have been like in the transforming transportation sector, what would you honestly say? No filter. Makhtar Diop.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're right. The time has changed. In many dimensions. Last year, at the same time, we were talking about totally different things with a different emphasis. What is central today to the conversation is the recovery, rebuilding better, but rebuilding differently. Climate change is an organizing framework for all of us to discuss transportation because it touches as many dimensions of our work in transportation: inclusion, sustainability, and gender equality. If we don't talk about climate change and include it in transport, we are forgetting all these dimensions. It talks about different also part of the society. Mayors are essential in the policy that we are implementing in transport. The private sector will be driving the process. And without the organizing framework of government, we will not be able to do that. And more than ever, science is important and essential in what we are doing. We also learned that we cannot talk about transport in an isolated way. Today, these crises have shown us that digital is an essential complement to be able to have the proper solution for transportation. We understand that now, without a clean energy, we cannot talk about transportation of tomorrow. What we learn also is that we need to work cross-sectorally. It's not only a matter of building road, of working with engineering solution, but we need to think about the social contract which is organizing societies. Lastly, we learn also that during that last few years, that emerging economies are doing a great job in pushing the agenda in terms of renewable energy and renewable mode of transportation. We have seen that a lot of the pickup on solar has been coming for developing country. We have seen a lot of the integrated type of transportation have been innovating in developing countries. We've seen in emerging countries a lot of interesting solutions, and these guys give us hope that the growth that we will have in transportation is always being built on innovations that we are seeing in developing countries. Now, as we are moving forward, the big question is the financing of all this, and the NDC conversation is central to it, and I will be able to come back to that.
I now see that the connection with Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, who is the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone, is now working. So I'm going to take that opportunity to welcome the mayor to the conversation. This idea of the imminent crisis, you have been on climate change for a long time. What difference has the last few months made to you, made to Freetown, if any?
Thanks, Femi. I think there's been a focusing of everyone's minds. The focus, of course, rightly so, has been on the pandemic, on COVID, but in a way, it's actually created space for conversations around climates to also be elevated. You mentioned that last year, everybody was gathered. You may recall that I actually called in and into this meeting last year virtually. I did that because of diary clashes, but what we're learning is that, there is the opportunity for the world to be configured differently. Here in Freetown, the COVID crisis has had the biggest impact of the COVID crisis has been on the economy for now. The second wave is looking different, and sadly, our case numbers are much higher now than they were before. But from the perspective of what that means, climate and the green conversation, and sort of how that ties into transportation, I think what we are seeing is that the pressure to bring change in the context of poverty, in the context of poor regulations, in the context of a dynamic which isn't staying still, means that the policy conversations and the financing conversations are really critical. There's another dimension to this which I think is really important, and that is, what are the levers for change? Things have to move faster, further. And therefore, sometimes the decisions can't just be left to when a government wants to do something. If there are innovations at the city level which can be scaled, how do we come together collectively to see those happening? In Freetown, we are promoting a move, and I think this is a real opportunity for many countries in the we have public transport, but not in the way that it's thought of. So most of our public transport is low occupancy. 80% of people don't have cars. So we have an opportunity now to leapfrog, to move from poor, low occupancy, when I say poor, I mean heavy polluting, old vehicles, motorbikes, to leapfrog to clean mass transit solutions such as cable cars. So I think we've had space in COVID to think more, to talk more. There's been less flying, but there's also been more conversations around crisis and how we adapt to crisis, both from the perspective of the link between climate and health, and the need for the policy conversations and the financing conversations to be much more backed by levers of change, by influence externally and internally.
Mayor, as you were speaking, Minister van Veldhoven, she was writing down notes. Minister, what's on your notepad? Share it with us.
Well, many things, I must say. I loved, of course, the introduction made by Andrew Steer about the 5 opportunities. And the saying that there is an opportunity for the world to be configured differently. That is what I was writing down, because I thought that is so true. This is chaos and opportunity at the same time. And we need to use this period of chaos to build back differently. And I'm always amazed if I hear from Freetown what the concepts are that you are thinking about, how you are basically saying that innovation, financing and policies should all come together. The need for financing, I think, is very clear. What I also really concur is that we need to go faster and further. We have no time to waste. I think this session is called about the imminent crisis. It's already here. It is already here. So it's not imminent, it's here. And we need to turn this around, and we can turn this around. And I think public transport, active transportation are going to play crucial roles, both in the developing world and also in the developed world. We need to use public transport more smart. We need to use active transportation much more. It is good for climate, but it also has a direct effect on health in our inner cities. And that is why I'd also like to add to the conversation the need to start working on freight. Because as the presentation by WRI showed, freight transportation is taking up a lot of our emissions. And if we can decrease those heavy loaders of CO2 emissions, we can clean up the climate, but we can also clean up the air in the inner cities, where so many people live together in an often very, very polluted environment. In the Netherlands alone, 1 in 5 children that suffers from asthma has this because of air pollution. And that's only the surface of the iceberg. So we have so much to gain by decarbonizing transport. If we want to go fast enough, then we need also ambitious targets. So I would say the Netherlands has said 2030 for all passenger cars. I think we should also say for freight, let's see if we can go for 30% in 2030, taking a big dent out of the pie that we really need to eat all together. We need to bring this down much faster than we are doing right now. And it is possible. The technology is there.
Minister, in New Delhi, I am thinking about what is your imminent crisis regarding climate and mobility, or are you already in it? As the Minister from the Netherlands said, like, there's no imminent crisis. We're in crisis right now.
No, I think as rightly pointed out by the different speakers, we have seen unprecedented times, very challenging times. I think the whole world is facing the COVID-19 pandemic. Fortunately, in Delhi, we have seen 3 peaks, and right now the positivity rate is quite less, and things are very much under control. But as a transport minister, I think we saw very challenging times. When Delhi was in complete lockdown for almost a month, there was no public transport on roads. And slowly when we opened up the demand for public transport, we have around, at the moment, we have around 6,500 buses in Delhi. And we commute roughly around 50 lakh passengers every day. Delhi has taken very bold steps in last 5 years. In Delhi, we have a very dynamic and energetic Chief Minister, Mr. Arvind Kejriwal, under whose leadership we all work. And we have set very challenging targets for ourselves, keeping in mind that the public transport has to seen differently. And as the President and CEO, Mr. Andrew, also pointed out, that the entire, we apart from the climate change, I think we are looking for a system change. And as he rightly pointed out, that almost in the last 100 years, we have been building cities around automobile. I think this is the time, now the time has come that we should build cities or places around people. And I think
What is
Delhi has been
Minister, excuse me, what does that mean if you're building cities around people? How does that change? If anyone knows Delhi, they're thinking, wow,
yes,
how do you do that?
I'm coming to it. In last 5 years, we have taken very interesting steps, and we had wonderful results. And I think I would be missing if I don't mention the Delhi office of WRI. We have had continued and sustained support from Mr. O.P. Agarwal, who is associated with WRI, Mr. Amit Bhatt. You would be surprised to know that in last 5 years, we have been able to cut down 25% of pollution by taking very simple steps. In August 2020, we launched a very ambitious electric vehicle policy. And I would also like to share that from August to January, we have added almost 6,000 electric vehicle on Delhi roads. 6,000. Almost 2,500 beneficiaries. And we have set a very ambitious target for next 5 years that we would like all new vehicles which will be sold, 25% we want electric vehicles. So that will add up to almost 5 lakh vehicles. Now again, by how we have to go forward and how we can transform these cities. And I think Mr. Andrew also pointed out on that there has to be commitment, the finances. We have subsidized the purchase of new electric vehicles so that more and more people are motivated, and we have given them incentive. If they purchase a new electric vehicle, then Delhi government is going to give them substantial subsidy. Again, we have a dedicated electric vehicle cell to look into any issues which are coming up. We have a state electric vehicle board. We have separately we have a dedicated electric vehicle fund. So that will look into all the issues which are coming from day-to-day operations. And at the same time, if we don't have a ecosystem, an environment which is friendly, that will promote electric vehicles, we have also set a goal that every 3-kilometer radius, we want to have electric charging station. And we have set a target that almost 200
because this is an extraordinary, amazing, ambitious plan. I'm going to jump in here because we've got lots of questions for you, lots of questions for your co-panelists. I am wondering, though, on this electrifying Delhi plan, what is the biggest challenge? You noted we're going to give big incentives for people to turn over and bring on electric vehicles. What's the biggest challenge? If you're really
the biggest challenge right now, I think it is the high cost of electric vehicles. And I have been saying this last almost 4 to 5 years, that till the time we don't bring down the cost of electric vehicles, it is in reach of a common man. I think the first and foremost, the most important is the cost of electric vehicle. And second is that confidence, until unless the person buying electric vehicle, he has confidence that he'll be able to charge his electric vehicle without any problem. And that is why I mentioned that we have set a target for ourselves that we want to have electric charging station, public, private, within a radius of 3 kilometers. We want to set up a charging station, and we are also giving subsidy and incentive to any person who is setting up a private charging station also. And I think very soon we will have a very robust electric charging station network in entire Delhi.
Okay, I have a question for you, and I'm opening the questions to the floor. The floor, you've been giving me questions anyway, so thank you very much. This is from Matthias. If in India you subsidize electric vehicles, you are initiating a regressive policies benefiting the rich. Right? Question mark? Are you?
This question is
What do you
addressed to
think?
me or the other?
Yes, because it's electrifying vehicles. Maybe the vehicles are very expensive, only the rich can afford them, and so then this is a green policy that is applying to only
We
rich people.
we
Just a quick response, and then I'm
we
going to
have
move on.
we as you rightly said, we don't want this policy or benefit to go to rich people. We have set a target of the vehicle has to be within the limit of 15 lakhs. If the vehicle is above 15
Okay.
lakhs, then that person is not getting the subsidy. So very expensive cars, very expensive vehicles will not get the subsidy. It is only the vehicles which are within the reach of a common man. Only those people will
Okay.
get the subsidy.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I'm going to move the conversation on a little bit. I will come back to you. Thank you very much for that contribution. This is a really interesting question, Madam Minister and also Madam Mayor. The pandemic, this is from Leah Wright. Hi, Leah. The pandemic has shown a steady decrease in the use of public transportation, with many people speculating that ridership will continue to get worse. While efficient public transport is a sustainable option, the research has shown that the overall perception is getting worse. Are there any suggestions to deal with this problem, to encourage people to use public transport? Madam Mayor, you start first.
Well, I'm just going to start off by saying that the problems are very different depending on the part of the world you're in.
Indeed.
People who are staying away from public transport are people who had cars before the outbreak or who could get cars. As I said earlier, 80% of our residents do not own vehicles. So public transport is not an option. Our challenge is the mode of public transport which exists now. Low occupancy, old vehicles. So there are three main types of public transport. You have our minibuses, what known as pudas, usually very terribly overcramped, very old as well, because again, we don't have policies that deter the importation of old vehicles. That's also true of the taxis, which will take a maximum of 3-4 people. And then the most common is the Okada, the motorbike, or the tuk-tuk, which we call kekes. So we're not talking about people staying away from public transport. We're talking about people having no option. What we are seeking to do now is to provide an option which, as the economy grows, as the middle class grows, what tends to happen is you have more vehicle ownership. We want to ensure that we get in before that happens and provide mass transit, as I said, the cable car that we've been working on for the last year and a half. And we're just seeing.
Okay, so Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr has just frozen. Madam Mayor, I'm so sorry. I'm going to come back to you just as you were about to explain something very, very exciting. Let me go back to the questions and go to Madam Minister. This idea of people fleeing public transport. Have you seen this in the Netherlands? How do you encourage them to come back?
Well, yes, we have also seen this in the Netherlands. But what we are doing is making sure that public transport as a vital sector remains available to all those that are dependent on it. So I'm currently heavily subsidizing our public transport sector to ensure that a problem in the short term does not turn into a problem in the longer term. Because in a few years' time, we will be needing an enormous amount of public transport again. We have a growing population, our cities are densifying, and the only way to keep those cities built around people, another wonderful expression that was just mentioned on the panel, the way, if we want to keep those cities livable, we need to use public transport as the primary mode of transportation, together with cycling and walking. So we are taking, let's say, a little bit of a longer perspective to make sure that we are not penny wise, pound foolish, where it concerns our public sector. And I think that this is going to play a crucial role, and we are also actively at some point stimulating people to go back to the public transportation sector. But that is in light of the current COVID situation in the Netherlands, still a little bit too early.
Makhtar, thank you, Madam Minister. Makhtar, we're having a really... Yeah, go ahead.
I would like to add one thing, which you mentioned, that how the public transport, you can encourage more and more people to use public transport. Mayor also, Freetown also mentioned that 80% people don't own cars. So it means people are dependent on public transport. As I mentioned, Delhi, India, one of the largest democracies, and population, I think, is our strength and the most important resource we have. We under the dynamic leadership of Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal, we took a very bold step. We made public transport free for women in entire Delhi, in all buses, and we had very encouraging results. We had very encouraging feedback, because they were because why we took this step, because this is also connected with the safety and security of women passengers. So we made public transport absolutely free for women, and any female in Delhi can just get onto any public transport in buses in Delhi without worrying about the fare, and can change buses any number of times. And we had very, I think, on this scale, because if we talk about the percentage, we have around 30% of the entire all the passengers. We have women contributing to almost 30%. So I thought I'll just share this experience, and because this has been not been experimented in the entire world on this scale. Maybe few cities in Europe where you have public transport free. I was visiting Brussels and a few other, Paris and other. So I met few people who had read about this scheme, and I think the other, because see, public transport cannot be a source of revenue. I have been also raising this at different forums. If public transport is expensive, then I think it is going out of reach of a common man. Public transport has to be cheap. It has to be reliable. It has to be efficient. It has to be, I think, in some way be subsidized in one way or the other by either corporation, or by the municipal government, or by the state government, or by the federal government.
Madam Minister, go ahead.
Yes, well, indeed, we have a large amount of state subsidies at the moment, and also regional subsidies. I would like to come back to the situation of the polluting vehicles, and let's say the standards of vehicles. And one element that has made a really big difference in Europe when it comes to cleaning up the fleet is that the European Union has set standards for producers in what they put on the market. And this maximum amount of CO2 that such a vehicle can emit is going down and down and down, thereby forcing those manufacturers to start manufacturing zero-emission vehicles that are affordable. Because if they produce zero-emission vehicles that are too expensive, then not enough are going to be sold to bring down the average CO2 emission. So this has turned out to be a very effective instrument of bringing down the costs of e-vehicles. We even had companies subsidizing the sale of electric vehicles in the Netherlands because they needed to sell more to live up to the average CO2 emission. So setting standards can be a very, very powerful tool from governments in cleaning up transport and driving down emissions, either CO2 emissions or other polluting emissions. And that can really help to make the change, bringing in, let's say, the producers and making them take responsibility also for what is on the market.
Makhtar, let me bring you into this conversation here. This is from Illy. Illy's suggesting cities for people, and more improved roads for cars, public transport and micromobility should be a top priority for future financing of projects. What's your take on that, Makhtar? And I'm also thinking about how the World Bank is supporting transport decarbonisation and how you're promoting more livable cities. I think we can kind of wrap that all into one. But first of all, cities for people and good roads for cars. Thoughts?
No, thank you very much. And one thing that I would like to say is that the future of work will be influenced by the COVID-19 crisis. So the pattern of movement of people in city will be different. So it might be that we'll be moving as much as we moved before. It might be that people will be moving in much shorter area and be working from home or from collectively. So I think that in modeling a little bit the demand for transportation, this crisis is bringing a lot of new elements that we need to take into account. Secondly, as we are moving about electric vehicle, we need to think about greening the energy. That's why I was saying earlier that it's a multi-sectoral approach. If we have e-vehicles and we continue producing energy which is emitting a lot of CO2, we will not be solving the problem that we'll try to address. So as we are working on that, we need to work also on the energy transition. That's why I personally involved with the Energy Transition Council going to COP26, as much as I'm working also with Minister Stientje to build that coalition to green transportation and to move people to mass transportation. I think we need not to forget also that in a lot of countries, transport is about informal sector. How to bring the informal sector to be able to move to mass transit is the big challenge. Such, for instance, in a lot of our projects that the World Bank is implementing in rapid bus transit, one of the challenges that we are facing. When you come in a country where the informals, the minibuses, which are called Matatu in Kenya, Jaganya in Senegal, and they have the name in Liberia, where the main mean of transport, when you try to move people from these small buses, low density to BRTs with transporting a large number of people, you have a social question to address, because these people were employed in that segment of the transport industry will need to be employed in a more formal way and in a way which is different. So that transition is something important, and we are working with. So we are not only bringing a technical solution through the BRT or mass transit, but we are also addressing the social dimension of it, particularly when it comes to the informal sector. I think also that it will be important for us to focus on the low-hanging fruit. The issue of regulating the used car export to developing countries is an important element if we want to really green transportation. It's important that more advanced economies are having standard, implementing it, but we need to make sure that those cars which are not anymore allowed to move and to circulate in a more advanced country are not exported to developing countries and transferring the problem in countries which have less resources and less stronger institutions. As we are going, I think if you take a lesson of the previous COP didn't have always a full alignment between what was discussed at the sectoral level by the Ministry of Transportation, the policies that we put in place in that sector, and what was discussed also as the Minister of Energy and the Minister of Environment. So we think that one of the lessons we can learn from the COP21 is that in this new round of NDCs, we need to make sure that the policies that are being developed by the Ministries of Transportation, by the Ministries of Energy, are clearly reflected in the objective and target that we are having. Lastly, we are an opportunity, to my view, to leapfrog in a lot of developing countries. And to leapfrog, we need to address the financing. When we talk about countries to do this massive change that we are talking about, they talked about financing. And in the NDCs, we have the unconditional and conditional targets. So we need to make sure that the conditional targets, which means the the targets that can be reached if money is put at the table are really supported, and the international community thinks about the financial architecture to support this transition in a much faster way.
Madam Mayor, it's good to have you back in the conversation. As Makhtar was mentioning leapfrog, that's exactly what you were talking about. You were talking about the cable car system, how imminent it was. Can you pick up? Because I can almost visualize it. It sounds like Sierra Leone and Freetown in particular could be this visionary, amazing city that is going to strike us when we get to Freetown because it has a transport system that the rest of the world doesn't have. Please continue.
So the transport system would be picking up on the experience of Medellin and Bogota, cities that we've studied. We've discussed with them and working with them on how to make this happen. So we're not going to be the first, but certainly to the point that was made just before by Makhtar in his statement, the leapfrogging. This is precisely the opportunity that I see, and I think that the most important piece here is around funding availability. So we've literally spent a year and a half just trying to raise the resources we need and the government support we need, because we can't do it purely at the city level, in order for us to do the full feasibilities. We're talking about a fairly small initial pilot, line of about 35 kilometers, but it will be transformational. Transformational from the perspective of reduction in emissions, and to the point that was made about the informal sector. One of the things which perhaps we're not making enough of is the increase in economic productivity that will come from these mass transit systems. The fact that I will now be able to get across town in 15 minutes instead of in 2 hours, that increase in economic productivity also creates potential for more employment. And that shouldn't be lost in this discourse about the loss of jobs coming out of the informal sector. But I think I want to just end on this. The key to these changes is financing and policy. And I want to reiterate, the thing about the climate crisis is that it affects all of us, no matter where we are. So if we have, emissions continuing in the south, it will impact the north, and vice versa. So we need to work together. We cannot have vehicles being exported to the global south which are not fit for purpose in the West, in the North, in the industrialized countries. And at the same time, we can't have turn a blind eye to situations where there is the move or the will. There's got to be the funding to support the rhetoric at the international level. When we go to COP, it can't just be saying, let's do this and let's do that, and then those who have the wherewithal to do it can move forward. There's got to be a recognition that, as with COVID, if the expression leave no one behind has to become real. As with COVID, if the investment isn't being made everywhere, then the problem is still going to affect everyone.
I want to bring this comment in
because if I may, I just want to say one word.
Sure, please.
Because I would like to say that in these, what the COVID-19 really taught us also is partnership. With Minister Stientje and other colleagues, we are working together and building a coalition. And what the Mayor Yvonne just said is extremely important. So as we are discussing, I think we secure Stientje a session at COP26, we will be focusing on transport. And this question of on transition, a rapid bus transit, of taking the human dimension of what we are talking about will be essential. And we are really, it's a plea, I don't know if I will be able to come back to the discussion, to say that let's join that coalition. This is a coalition we have in the sessions, the way we organize it in this transporting. If we have a session on health just after with our colleague Makhtar, we have a session with the mayors who will be sharing experience and telling us what work, and we need to listen to them and bring their message to the COP 26, and we will have the private sector talking, and my colleague Stephanie from IFC will be approaching. So we have this time really, I think, a lot of stars aligned, and building a coalition will be helping us to make a big difference at the COP26.
Here's a challenge.
Can I say a quick thing? Can I say a quick thing to Makhtar? So the World Bank, you continue to talk about bus rapid transport, BRTs. We need to be listening, really listening, and realizing that all cities have different even geographic layouts. BRTs are difficult in a city like Freetown. There's a World Bank project for a BRT, but we have an overcrowded city which has evolved with time, with no planning. So actually being able to have the space, the physical space, the cost of that, so when we say we want to do a cable car and the World Bank says we want to do a BRT, we've got the mountains, we've got the elevation. We need real listening if this conversation is really going to make a difference. So let me just plug that for the World Bank. Thank you.
Hashtag real listening. Okay. We have that little viral moment for today. Thank you, Madam Mayor. All right, this now we're going to be doing some real listening, everybody. All right. Okay. This is really important. And I love this because it's shaking up our conversation, just as Madam Mayor just there. This is from Annie. Let's get our priorities right. Let's get people to where they need to go safely, affordably, using high quality public transport, public, private, informal, doesn't matter, walking, biking. Get people away from cars, electrify what's left. Ha! Get rid of the cars. Madam Minister, you go first.
Well, yes, if you get rid of cars, at least in the inner cities, you clear up so much space for people. So if we want to build our cities for people, we need to make sure that we make good use of the very limited space. So yes, let's make sure that there is an attractive alternative and that it's the easiest alternative to go walking, cycling, or using public transport. And then we can really rebuild, let's say, our inner cities. There's one point which I would love to pick up a little bit from our previous discussion, which is about the second-hand cars that are being exported. I really think that we need to come together there. I was part of commissioning a study that indeed highlighted the state of the cars that are being exported, but I cannot solve that alone from the Netherlands. We need to do this in partnership, and if we all want to clean up those vehicles, then we can do that jointly. So that's an offer. Let's see how we can work together in the context of cleaning up transportation everywhere, because that was a very true word. For the climate, it doesn't matter where it is emitted, it's all bad. So we need, for all of us, to clean up transport everywhere. And real listening is going to be key, because the only way to speed up is to make sure that you adapt to the local situation and find what works there. So let's try and find out what works.
Madam Minister, I like that idea, that initiative. Is it something that you just thought up on the spot, or do you know that it is possible to export cars for developing nations, but export clean cars?
Well, we did a study, and I think also together with UNDP, recently launched, showing the state of the cars that were being exported, sometimes unsafe cars that were really unsafe. And they were being exported, let's say, as being scrap, but they were being imported as vehicles. So this is, I think, where the problem lies. We can only avoid exportation if there's also a barrier to the importation. And so we need to find a way, let's say, for our customs officials to join forces and to make sure that we control what's going out and that you control what's going in, to make sure that transportation is safe everywhere. In the context of the UNDP, we are working on this, and anybody who wants to join, very welcome.
Minister Gahlot, let's go back to that radical thought. Get rid of cars. As Minister of Transport in Delhi, would that give you sleepless nights?
Oh yeah, it does. It does. We have plenty of cars in Delhi on the roads, and I think the only way out if we really want to reduce the number of cars, shift more and more people to public transport, I think the only way out is if we have a robust and sustainable public transport, whether it is BRT or whether it is the mass rapid transport system or minibuses or whether any kind of public transport. So I think the first and foremost and most important thing is to have a very efficient and robust public transport, which again brings up the challenge that of the finances. I think a lot of cities and places, they struggle with the finances. And apart from having a robust public transport, I think what really will make this shift is the approach and the attitude of people as well, that it is absolutely fine to use public transport. It is not that only poor people will use public transport. And lastly, I think being a politician and being a minister, I think the most important thing is to have a political will to really change the way the entire public transport system all over the world is conceived. I think if we have the political will, we can surely bring about that change. And what exactly we are talking about, that the cities should be built around people. Thank you.
Political will, Minister, but also Kitombi, who is watching this session. Kitombi says that he's reading the comments, he's watching the session, he knows that one important point has been omitted. I believe that culture is one of the points to be considered. The simple example could be the mentality of considering cars as the solution of transport mobility in some areas of Africa. The idea of culture. Makhtar, can you pick up on that?
Yes, I'm speaking from I'm Senegalese. I lived in Nairobi also, so I have a sense a little bit of. I think it's also the quality of the offer. When you have a public service, public transportation of quality, people are ready to shift. I believe, with obviously a lot of sensitization and explaining the importance of doing so, to shift from car to public transport. Because if you take a city like Nairobi, the time you spend in traffic is so important that whoever is given an opportunity to have a shorter journey will be taking that opportunity. I think that what is missing often is the quality of that supply. And I think that as we'll be going with improving that quality, ensuring that there is no gender-based violence in this public transport, as long as we ensure that it's well regulated, I'm very optimistic that people will be able to shift from individual car to more collective means of transportation, as we saw in Europe. That's what happened in Europe. People are moving. Now, a lot of people in large cities in Europe don't own a car. It's because they know that they can access safe means of transportation, which will be available, reliable, and safe.
Madam Minister, I want to put this question to you. This comes from Bianca. Bianca says, how do we communicate outside our transport crowd the more complex ideas of decarbonisation, not only e-vehicles? And this is something that you are doing in the Netherlands. You are working on decarbonisation. How did you share that information? How do you communicate that? How do you educate people?
Well, thank you very much for that. And I think it is making sure that people are aware that decarbonizing transport is about creating more space, creating more clean air, good for their health. So there is, even if you are not on a daily basis working on climate, you are walking with your toddler in the city center. You see those buses with all those fumes, and it's your child inhaling that. and you yourself inhaling that. There is no getting away from air, no getting away from air pollution. And getting that message across, let's say, opened a different group of people to listen to why it is so important to decarbonize transport. It has a lot of added benefits. It has also helped, of course, that there is much more awareness now of climate change and the need to tackle climate change, because it's the world of future generations that we are shaping right now. We are the first and last who can do something about it. The first generation who really knows how bad it is, and the last generation that can still make a change. And it's also that appeal to the broader issue at stake, but also the optimistic message that there's things that we can change. I mean, it's more silent, it's cleaner. So basically, it's a very positive agenda that we are driving together. And so, yes, it's difficult. Yes, but there's also many options. There are many opportunities. There's not one way for everybody. So let's find your way to decarbonize and make sure you inform about the health benefits on the way.
Makhtar, do you want to come in on this? Because I know it's something that the World Bank is trying to encourage countries to do. How are you doing that?
Let's give you an example. If you go to a village and you bring PV, solar, you bring electricity to a village who never had electricity. But at the same time, they can charge an e-vehicle which can move people from the village to the smaller city. This is what decarbonize should be meaning for people in developing countries. So it's not something which is abstract, but something very concrete. And I think that's why we need to bring integrated solution to people. Because if they have a little bit of electricity but don't have transportation, if they have transportation and don't have electricity, if they have electricity and not access to internet or to broadband, their way of living is not sufficient. And I know that Yvonne, as a mayor, is facing that every day. When you go to your constituency and talk to people, say, tell you, Madam Mayor, I need all of these. I need health, I need education, I need transportation. So how we can leverage all this? So what do you think we are doing for me is to share infrastructure. You will see how we're surprised to see that in the same place you have a post which is used for putting a mobile antenna, another one which is used for electricity, another one for the water sector, and all that could cost a lot of money to the community. So what we are pushing people to do is to share infrastructure, to make sure that we're coming to the citizen with a solution which is less costly. Third, we also need not to forget adaptation. Adaptation has been something very important in what we are doing. You're talking about mitigating emission, but also as things are moving and we take time to bring them to the level we want, we need to adapt to that new reality. And it's something that particularly developing countries are asking for, how we can help us to adapt to this climate change while we are taking these important measures. I think that my main message is that we have now a window we need to seize. This is a window where the children in the street are asking for a greener world. They have convinced us that this is the way the world should be done. We are seeing the cost of renewable energy going down drastically. We are seeing a very fast adoption of new technologies in transport. We are seeing IoT. We are seeing all these things happening. So we have an opportunity where we have a convergence of technology adoption, which is accelerated, a social contract which is telling us to do things differently, and it will be leading, to my view, to a more inclusive world and a world which is more sustainable.
Speakers, we hit the final question, and for this final question I will get all of your responses, but you only have 30 seconds to respond. So, extra challenge. This is from Gabriella. When we talk about prioritizing public transport, walking and cycling, we need to rethink the shape of our cities. How are you all approaching this? Minister Gahlot.
I think I am again going to point, we must at least restart building the cities around people. And again, we have taken a very bold decision, Delhi government. We have converted one of the most congested and a very old place in Delhi called Chandni Chowk. It's absolutely now absolutely free of any vehicle, any motorized vehicle, and the entire place has been converted people friendly and for pedestrians.
Okay.
I think this is one of the experiment which Delhi government has done, and it has been very successful, very widely appreciated, and I think we are going to take this thing to the rest of the other parts of Delhi also.
Scale it up. All right. Thank you so much. Minister van Veldhoven, rethinking the shape of cities in the Netherlands. How would you do that? Are you doing it?
Well, when we are rebuilding in our inner cities, we're creating less parking places, more space for bikes, and biking and public transport are the primary modes of transport in that quarter. So we're designing for public transport and cycling, cleaning up more space, giving more space to people. We are broadening our cycling lanes. We are creating zero emission zones in our inner cities, cleaning up the air. And we are also helping people to purchase e-bikes, making it easier and more attractive also to take distances up to 15 kilometers on a daily basis, which is very easy in a flat country like the Netherlands. But that is why real listening is important, because in Freetown that might be a bit more of a challenge even on an e-bike.
Madam Real Listening Mayor Aki-Sawyerr, in 30 seconds, how are you rethinking the way that Freetown looks?
I am so glad this was the last question, because I was just thinking that what we haven't talked about is urban planning, land use planning, management, of the urban space, which is critical to getting this right. We are, as one example, we are with funding from the city of Zurich. Big shout out to my partner city there, doing a regeneration of our central business district. And part of that will include introducing, for the first time ever, a pedestrianized area. But I want us to also talk for just 2 seconds on the root causes of the urban sprawl that we see in so many cities on the continent. You are not going to have the solutions we're talking about without being able to control that. And that is often because of problems with land ownership, often because of cross mandates between city governments and local and national governments, and also because, of course, of rural urban migration. Without addressing these things, you can have pockets of nice areas, green with your pedestrianized streets, but your general state of the city continues to be one which is ineffective and unhealthy, and not really speaking to all the things that we've been talking about from the perspective of greening and the perspective of more efficiency. So we've got to deal with those root causes, the challenges of urban planning within this context of African cities.
Thank you, speakers, for your time today. We really appreciate you. This is the end of Plenary One session. Thank you, speakers. You did an excellent job.